Chapter 12 of the Europeans. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The Europeans by Henry James. Chapter 12. Felix allowed Charlotte time to plead his cause, and then, on the third day, he sought an interview with his uncle. It was in the morning. Mr. Wentworth was in his office, and on going in, Felix found that Charlotte was at that moment in conference with her father. She had, in fact, been constantly near him since her interview with Felix. She had made up her mind that it was her duty to repeat very literally her cousin's passionate plea. She had accordingly followed Mr. Wentworth about like a shadow, in order to find him at hand when she should have mustered sufficient composure to speak. For poor Charlotte, in this matter, naturally lacked composure, especially when she meditated upon some of Felix's intimations. It was not cheerful work, at the best, to keep giving small hammer taps to the coffin in which one had laid away, for burial, the poor little unacknowledged offspring of one's own misbehaving heart, and the occupation was not rendered more agreeable by the fact that the ghost of one's stifled dream had been summoned from the shades by the strange, bold words of a talkative young foreigner. What had Felix meant by saying that Mr. Brand was not so keen? To herself, her sister's justly depressed suitor had shown no sign of faltering. Charlotte trembled all over when she allowed herself to believe for an instant now and then that, privately, Mr. Brand might have faltered; and as it seemed to give more force to Felix's words to repeat them to her father, she was waiting until she should have taught herself to be very calm. But she had now begun to tell Mr. Wentworth that she was extremely anxious. She was proceeding to develop this idea, to enumerate the objects of her anxiety, when Felix came in. Mr. Wentworth sat there with his legs crossed, lifting his dry, pure countenance from the Boston Advertiser. Felix entered smiling, as if he had something particular to say, and his uncle looked at him as if he both expected and deprecated this event. Felix, vividly expressing himself, had come to be a formidable figure to his uncle, who had not yet arrived at definite views as to a proper tone. For the first time in his life, as I have said, Mr. Wentworth shirked a responsibility. He earnestly desired that it might not be laid upon him to determine how his nephew's lighter propositions should be treated. He lived under an apprehension that Felix might yet beguile him into assent to doubtful inductions, and his conscience instructed him that the best form of vigilance was the avoidance of discussion. He hoped that the pleasant episode of his nephew's visit would pass away without a further lapse of consistency. Felix looked at Charlotte with an air of understanding, and then at Mr. Wentworth, and then at Charlotte again. Mr. Wentworth bent his refined eyebrows upon his nephew and stroked down the first page of the Advertiser. "I ought to have brought a bouquet," said Felix, laughing. "In France they always do." "We are not in France," observed Mr. Wentworth gravely, while Charlotte earnestly gazed at him. "No, luckily we are not in France, where I am afraid I should have a harder time of it. My dear Charlotte, have you rendered me that delightful service?" And Felix bent toward her as if someone had been presenting him. Charlotte looked at him with almost frightened eyes, and Mr. Wentworth thought this might be the beginning of a discussion. "What is the bouquet for?" he inquired, by way of turning it off. Felix gazed at him, smiling. "Pour la demande." And then, drawing up a chair, he seated himself, hat in hand, with a kind of conscious solemnity. Presently he turned to Charlotte again. "My good Charlotte, my admirable Charlotte," he murmured, "you have not played me false? You have not sided against me?" Charlotte got up, trembling extremely, though imperceptibly. "You must speak to my father yourself," she said. "I think you are clever enough." But Felix, rising too, begged her to remain. "I can speak better to an audience," he declared. "I hope it is nothing disagreeable," said Mr. Wentworth. "It's something delightful for me!" and Felix, laying down his hat, clasped his hands a little between his knees. "My dear uncle," he said, "I desire very earnestly to marry your daughter Gertrude." Charlotte sank slowly into her chair again, and Mr. Wentworth sat staring, with a light in his face that might have been flashed back from an iceberg. He stared and stared. He said nothing. Felix fell back, with his hands still clasped. "Ah, you don't like it! I was afraid." He blushed deeply, and Charlotte noticed it, remarking to herself that it was the first time she had ever seen him blush. She began to blush herself and to reflect that he might be much in love. "This is very abrupt," said Mr. Wentworth at last. "Have you never suspected it, dear uncle?" Felix inquired. "Well, that proves how discreet I have been. Yes, I thought you wouldn't like it." "It is very serious, Felix," said Mr. Wentworth. "You think it's an abuse of hospitality!" exclaimed Felix, smiling again. "Of hospitality? An abuse?" his uncle repeated very slowly. "That is what Felix said to me," said Charlotte, conscientiously. "Of course you think so. Don't defend yourself," Felix pursued. "It is an abuse, obviously. The most I can claim is that it is perhaps a pardonable one. I simply fell head over heels in love. One can hardly help that. Though you are Gertrude's progenitor, I don't believe you know how attractive she is. Dear uncle, she contains the elements of a singularly, I may say a strangely, charming woman." "She has always been to me an object of extreme concern," said Mr. Wentworth. "We have always desired her happiness." "Well, here it is!" Felix declared. "I will make her happy. She believes it too. Now, hadn't you noticed that?" "I had noticed that she was much changed," Mr. Wentworth declared, in a tone whose unexpressive, unimpassioned quality appeared to Felix to reveal a profundity of opposition. "It may be that she is only becoming what you call a charming woman." "Gertrude at heart is so earnest, so true," said Charlotte very softly, fastening her eyes upon her father. "I delight to hear you praise her!" cried Felix. "She has a very peculiar temperament," said Mr. Wentworth. "Eh, even that is praise!" Felix rejoined. "I know I am not the man you might have looked for. I have no position and no fortune. I can give Gertrude no place in the world. A place in the world, that's what she ought to have. That would bring her out." "A place to do her duty," remarked Mr. Wentworth. "Ah, how charmingly she does it, her duty!" Felix exclaimed with a radiant face. "What an exquisite conception she has of it! But she comes honestly by that, dear uncle." Mr. Wentworth and Charlotte both looked at him as if they were watching a greyhound doubling. "Of course with me she will hide her light under a bushel," he continued, "I being the bushel. Now I know you like me; you have certainly proved it. But you think I am frivolous and penniless and shabby. Granted, granted, 1,000 times granted. I have been a loose fish, a fiddler, a painter, an actor. But there is this to be said. In the first place, I fancy you exaggerate. You lend me qualities I haven't had. I have been a Bohemian, yes. But in Bohemia I always passed for a gentleman. I wish you could see some of my old camarades. They would tell you. It was the liberty I liked, but not the opportunities. My sins were all peccadilloes. I always respected my neighbor's property, my neighbor's wife. Do you see, dear uncle?" Mr. Wentworth ought to have seen. His cold blue eyes were intently fixed. "And then, c'est fini. It's all over. Je m'arrange. I have settled down to a jog trot. I find I can earn my living, a very fair one, by going about the world and painting bad portraits. It's not a glorious profession, but it is a perfectly respectable one. You won't deny that, eh? Going about the world, I say? I must not deny that, for that I am afraid I shall always do, in quest of agreeable sitters. When I say agreeable, I mean susceptible of delicate flattery and prompt of payment. Gertrude declares she is willing to share my wanderings and help to pose my models. She even thinks it will be charming, and that brings me